Many church traditions teach that Christian rituals, specifically water baptism and the Lord's Supper, impart saving or mystical grace to the participant. This animated diagram maps the tension between those post-Reformation traditions on the left and the actual biblical texts on the right. When we cross-examine traditional sacramental theology against the New Testament texts it claims to rely on, severe internal contradictions emerge. To understand what these rites actually accomplish, we have to bypass medieval assumptions and analyze the text through its original first-century Jewish context, specific Greek syntax, and strict Old Testament typology. The texts reveal biblical rituals were never designed to act as mystical dispensers of saving grace. They operate as robust mechanisms for covenant loyalty, for community inclusion, and cosmic spiritual warfare. The analysis begins with the Apostle Paul, who strikes a direct typological link between Old Testament circumcision and New Testament baptism in Colossians 2. This linkage creates a strict exegetical rule. Whatever cannot logically be said about the Old Testament type, circumcision, cannot be said about the New Testament antitype, baptism. The Old Testament record proves that circumcision did not provide salvation or lessen a person's sinful impulse. The vast majority of circumcised Israelite men routinely fell into idolatry and apostasy, eventually prompting the curse of Yahweh and the exile. This is a stone relief from ancient Egypt. It shows that circumcision was a widely shared cultural practice among neighboring pagan cultures. The physical cutting itself possessed no unique salvific efficacy. In ancient Israel, the ritual served a highly specific functional purpose. It granted the recipient access to the covenant community. That community exclusively possessed the oracles of God, the truth regarding Yahweh and how to be rightly related to Him. Applying Paul's typological rule directly to the New Testament yields a clear result. If circumcision merely placed a person into the hearing community so they could exercise faith, then water baptism performs the exact same mechanical function, without dispensing salvation. This typological rule must survive contact with the most difficult texts. Acts 22:16 is routinely cited to defend the idea that water baptism directly washes away sins. This tree breaks down the Greek grammar of Acts 22:16. The verse hinges on two aorist imperatives, be baptized and wash, flanked by aorist participles. The action of washing away sins is grammatically tied directly to the active participle, calling on His name. The text does not say the water causes the washing. The washing away of sins is caused entirely by the act of faith, calling on the name of the Lord. Subjecting the text to basic Greek grammatical rigor dissolves the strongest alleged proof text for baptismal salvation. 1 Peter 3 is notorious for its bizarre sequence of ideas, connecting water baptism directly to Noah's Ark and spirits in prison. Decoding Peter's thought process requires reading the text through a first-century Jewish lens. Peter is referencing the book of 1 Enoch and the Genesis 6 rebellion of divine beings known as the Watchers. Chapters 13 and 14 of 1 Enoch describe the prophet Enoch descending into the underworld. He does not go to preach salvation. He goes solely to announce doom and deny the appeal of these imprisoned fallen entities. This mapping matrix reveals Peter's typological logic. He places Jesus directly into the role of a second Enoch. Following His crucifixion and resurrection, Jesus' descent to the spirits in prison was a victory lap. He announced to the demonic realm that their defeat was absolute, and God's plan of salvation remained perfectly intact. In verse 21, Peter uses the Greek word epirotima to describe baptism. This term denotes a pledge or a loyalty oath. Baptism acts as a public declaration of spiritual warfare. It serves as a visceral reminder to defeated cosmic forces that the newly baptized believer is aligned with the risen Christ. The same strict adherence to the text must be applied to the Lord's Supper. Traditional Catholic and early Protestant models assume that Christ's literal body and blood, or a mystical equivalent, are present in the communion elements. These literal consumption models rely almost entirely on Jesus' discourse in John chapter 6, where He commands His followers to eat my flesh and drink my blood. This timeline exposes a massive chronological error. John 6 is not the Last Supper. That occurs 7 chapters later in John 13. The chapter 6 discourse features no bread distribution, no wine, no new covenant language, and no betrayal announcement. This photograph of the ruins of the Capernaum synagogue anchors the historical reality of the text. Jesus delivered this teaching in a public synagogue to a standard crowd, long before the events of the upper room. The internal logic of the discourse is explicitly stated by Jesus himself. He clarifies that spiritual hunger is satisfied by coming to him, and spiritual thirst is satisfied by believing in him. Using John 6 to build a theology of physical communion elements relies on an anachronism. Eating and drinking in this chapter are purely metaphors for faith. The correct textual basis for the Lord's Supper is found in Paul's writings in 1 Corinthians 10 and 11. Paul specifically grounds his instructions on the actual night of the Last Supper. To explain the ritual, Paul utilizes a specific Old Testament framework, the Levitical priesthood and their sacrificial meals. This matrix of the Old Testament sacrificial system highlights a strict boundary. Priests were completely forbidden from eating any portion of the sin offering, which provided the sacrifice of atonement. Priests only ate from the peace offering. That specific meal dispensed 0 atoning grace. It functioned entirely as a communal meal, celebrating a right relationship with God that had already been established by prior sacrifices. Paul maps this exact framework onto the New Testament church using the Greek word koinonia, meaning participation or fellowship. The text presents communion not as a mystical mechanism to solicit forgiveness or ingest saving grace. It is a koinonia fellowship meal, designed to remember an atonement that was completely finished on the cross. Elevating post-biblical traditions over chronological text analysis, Greek grammar, and ancient Near Eastern context inevitably obscures the biblical narrative. Baptism is not a salvific washing of the flesh. It is an Enochian loyalty oath and the entry point into the hearing community of faith. The Lord's Supper is not a mystical ingestion of grace. It is a Levitical fellowship meal proclaiming the finished work of the cross. Stripped of creedal confusion, the original texts offer a theology of ritual that is robust, logically consistent, and